The sun was a burning coin in the empty sky, pouring waves of heat over the endless plains of Red Creek. Wind pushed sand and grit through the air, swirling in angry spirals that stung the skin and blurred the horizon. A lone figure stumbled through it. A young woman, her pale dress torn, her hat long gone, and her boots heavy with dust. Her name was Clara Weston, and she hadn't looked back in 3 days. Not since she left the town of Dry Gulch with blood on her hands and a secret gnawing at her heart. She pressed a trembling hand against her thigh, where the pain was worst. Beneath the fabric, her skin throbbed and burned, the mark of a rattlesnake bite. She'd tried to tie it off with a strip of her own petticoat, but the swelling had grown fast, the skin turning purple and tight. Her breath came in shallow gasps. Each step felt heavier than the last. When she saw the shape of a wooden fence through the storm haze, she thought it might be a mirage. She stumbled closer, her vision dimming. The fence led to a wide stretch of land, a lonely ranch surrounded by the howling wind. There were horses in the corral, their heads bowed against the dust and smoke rising from a chimney. Clara managed one more step before her legs gave way. She fell hard to the ground, her fingers clutching at the dry grass. That's when she heard it, the slow creak of leather, the heavy sound of boots on the porch, and then a voice. Low and rough. "You're a long way from town, miss." Through her blurred vision, she saw a man, tall, broad-shouldered, with a hat pulled low over his eyes. His beard was dark with dust, his shirt rolled up, revealing forearms thick with years of work. His name, though she didn't know it yet, was Elias Kane, owner of the Kane Ranch, a man who had seen too much loss to still believe in miracles. Clara tried to speak, but only a dry whisper came out. "Snake bite." Elias dropped to his knees beside her, eyes narrowing as he pulled back the torn fabric. His expression hardened. The bite was angry, swollen, the skin around it burning red. She was in bad shape, maybe hours from death. He didn't waste another word. In one swift motion, he lifted her into his arms and carried her into the cabin. Inside, the air was cooler, filled with the scent of wood smoke and leather. He laid her on the table near the fire and grabbed a kettle of water, a bottle of whiskey, and a knife from his belt. His movements were quick, practiced, the kind of calm that came from someone who had seen pain before and refused to let it break him again. Clara's eyes fluttered open as he poured whiskey over the wound. The sting made her cry out, and Elias pressed a steadying hand to her shoulder. "Easy now," he murmured, voice deep and steady. "If I don't act fast, you won't see the morning." Her lips trembled. You don't even know me." He met her gaze for a heartbeat, a sharp, unreadable look. "Don't need to." Outside, the wind howled against the walls, but inside, time seemed to stand still. The world had narrowed to two strangers, one desperate to live, the other determined not to lose another soul to the cruel indifference of the desert. As the light flickered across her pale face, Elias saw something in her eyes, a kind of fire that hadn't yet gone out. No matter how bad her body was failing, he drew in a breath, glanced at the wound, and muttered under his breath, "It's swelling fast." And with that, he reached for his knife and did the unthinkable. Elias Kane's hand hovered over the knife for a moment, his jaw clenched tight as the reality of what needed to be done sank in. The venom was spreading quickly. He could see it in the dark veins crawling up her thigh, in the way her breath hitched, and her pulse fluttered weakly beneath the skin. If he waited even a few more minutes, the girl would die right there on his kitchen table. He muttered again, more to himself than to her. "It's swelling fast." The words made Clara stir. Her eyes flickered open, dazed and unfocused, locking on the gleam of the knife in his hand. Panic jolted through her foggy mind. She tried to push herself up, weakly gasping. What are you doing?" "Saving your life," Elias said flatly. He wasn't a man of many words. He never had been. But his tone left no room for argument. She tried to move, but her body betrayed her. The poison had sapped what little strength she had left. Elias grabbed a clean rag, soaked it in whiskey, and pressed it between her teeth. "Bite down," he ordered. "It's gonna hurt." Clara barely had time to shake her head before the knife came down. He made a small incision just below the bite, his movements precise and steady despite the tremor of tension in his chest. Blood welled up immediately, dark and thick. Clara screamed into the cloth, her back arching from the table. Tears streamed down her cheeks, her voice muffled and raw. Elias ignored the sound, not out of coldness, but necessity. He leaned in close, pressing his lips to the wound, and began to draw out the venom. It was a brutal, primitive act, one born of desperation rather than choice. The metallic taste of blood filled his mouth, bitter and hot, and he spat it out onto the floor. Repeating the process again and again, Clara trembled violently, her fingers clutching at the edges of the table, knuckles white. Each pull felt like fire racing through her leg. But amid the agony, she sensed something strange, a steadiness in his touch, a silent strength that anchored her against the storm of pain. When he finally stopped, Elias grabbed a clean bandage and wrapped her leg tightly. His breath was heavy, sweat beading on his brow. He poured more whiskey over the wound to clean it and whispered, "That's it. You're gonna be all right." She was crying softly now, her voice breaking between gasps. You didn't have to do that!" Elias gave a faint grunt, rinsing his mouth with whiskey before answering. Didn't have a choice. He set the knife aside, his rough hand surprisingly gentle as he adjusted the blanket over her. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled, the wind moaned against the shutters, and somewhere outside, a horse whinnied in the dark. Clara's breathing began to steady. Her skin, once flushed and feverish, cooled slightly. She blinked at him through her exhaustion, studying the man who had just saved her with an act that would have made any other soul hesitate. There was no softness in his face and only tired resolve. Yet, behind those weathered eyes, she caught a glimpse of something else. Sorrow, maybe, or the echo of someone he once couldn't save. "Why'd you help me?" she whispered weakly. "You don't even know who I am." Elias didn't look at her. He just leaned back in his chair, staring into the fire. "Doesn't matter who you are," he said quietly. "Ain't right to let someone die when you can do something about it." Clara closed her eyes, exhausted. His voice, gravelly and low, followed her into the dark as she slipped toward sleep. "Rest now. You'll need it." And as the flames danced across the cabin walls, Elias sat in silence, staring at his blood-stained hands. He'd done the unthinkable, not just saving her life, but breaking the barrier he'd built between himself and the rest of the world. Outside, the storm began to die down. But inside, something far more dangerous was beginning to stir. The quiet, undeniable connection between two strangers bound by one desperate night in the wild, unforgiving West. The night pressed heavy against the walls of the old ranch house. Outside, the wind had softened to a low, mournful whistle, but inside, the air was thick with the scent of blood, whiskey, and smoke. Elias Kane sat near the fire, his elbows resting on his knees, watching the flames lick the blackened wood. Behind him, on the cot near the window, Clara Weston tossed restlessly in her fevered sleep. Her body fought the venom even as the rancher's desperate treatment began to take hold. Sweat dampened her skin, her breathing shallow but steady. Every so often, she murmured something, fragments of names, half-formed sentences, the scattered pieces of a life Elias didn't yet understand. "Papa, I didn't mean to. Please don't," she whispered once, her voice small and trembling. Elias turned slightly, the firelight carving deep shadows across his face. He wasn't a man used to caring for anyone anymore. Not since his wife Margaret had died 2 winters back, taking their unborn child with her. After that, he'd built walls, both around his land and his heart. But as he watched the woman on his bed fight for her life, something stirred in him he thought had long since died, a flicker of concern, of purpose. He rose from his chair and walked to her side, checking the wound. The swelling had started to ease, though the skin around it was still dark and bruised. She winced as he touched it, but didn't wake. He soaked a rag in cool water and wiped the sweat from her brow, muttering quietly, "You're tough, I'll give you that." The room was silent except for the popping of the fire and the soft rasp of her breathing. Outside, a coyote cried, long, lonely, and sharp. Elias's gaze drifted to the window, where the moonlight cut through the cracks in the wood. He'd spent years alone in this cabin, the nights filled with nothing but the sounds of the desert and the ghosts of his own regrets. Now there was another heartbeat under his roof, fragile but alive. Clara stirred again, her eyes fluttering open for a moment. She looked at him as though seeing a memory. "You're him," she breathed faintly. "You came back." Elias frowned slightly. "No, miss." "You're safe. You're at Cane Ranch," but she didn't seem to hear him. Her hand lifted weakly, touching his arm as if to make sure he was real. "They said you were dead," she mumbled before slipping back into unconsciousness. Elias sighed and gently set her hand back down. He'd seen that look before, the kind of fear that didn't come from pain, but from running. Whoever she was, whatever she was running from, it was bad. He could see it in the way her shoulders tensed even in sleep, like she expected danger to walk through the door at any moment. He stood again, pacing a little, the weight of silence growing. Part of him wanted to saddle his horse, ride to town, and tell the sheriff about the woman he'd found. But another part, the quieter, more stubborn part, told him not to. She was alive because of him. That made her his responsibility, at least until she could stand again. Hours passed. The fire burned low. The fever began to break. Clara's breathing deepened, her color slowly returning. Elias covered her with another blanket and sat beside her again, exhaustion pulling at his eyes. As dawn crept across the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of amber and rose, Elias finally let his guard down. He rested back in his chair, hat tilted forward, and drifted into a light, uneasy sleep. Behind him, Clara turned her head toward the window, whispering something so soft it barely carried across the room. "Thank you." The word was faint, almost lost in the morning wind. But Elias heard it, and though he didn't open his eyes, a flicker of something, warmth, maybe even peace, passed across his worn face. For the first time in years, he wasn't the only soul fighting through the long night. Morning broke over the plains of Red Creek like a soft whisper, pale light spilling across the ranch, melting the frost that clung to the fence rails. The storm had passed, leaving the air calm, heavy with the scent of wet earth and sage. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned down to glowing embers. The world felt still, suspended between one breath and the next. Clara Weston awoke slowly, the way someone might rise from a long, painful dream. Her head throbbed, her mouth was dry, and her leg. She winced as the memory hit her. The bite, the knife, the burning agony. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The ceiling above her was wooden, smoke-stained, unfamiliar. Then she heard movement. The scrape of a chair, the sound of boots on old floorboards. Turning her head, she saw him. Elias Kane sat near the table, a mug of coffee in his hand, his hat pushed back slightly on his brow. He looked different in the daylight, not just rugged, but weathered, like a man carved out of the land itself. His eyes, sharp and steady, met hers for a brief moment before he looked away, as though modesty or habit kept him from staring too long. "You're awake," he said, his voice low, rough from disuse. Clara tried to sit up, but a bolt of pain shot through her leg, forcing her back down. Elias rose from his chair and crossed to her side, his boots creaking against the wood. "Don't move too fast," he said. "You're still weak." She glanced down at her leg. It was cleanly bandaged now, wrapped in fresh linen. The swelling had gone down, though the skin around it was discolored and sore. Someone, him, clearly, had tended to it carefully. She touched the edge of the bandage with trembling fingers, her voice barely a whisper. "You saved me." Elias gave a faint nod, setting the coffee mug on the small table beside her. Did what needed doing. There was no pride in his tone, no self-importance, just simple fact. Still, Clara's heart twisted with a strange mix of gratitude and unease. In her world, men didn't help without expecting something in return. But this one? He looked at her like she was just another task that had to be done right, nothing more. "Where am I?" she asked after a moment, her voice steadier now. "Cane Ranch," he replied. 20 miles west of Red Creek." "Red Creek," she murmured, her gaze drifting toward the window. The name sent a shiver through her. That wasn't far enough. Not from the men who'd be looking for her. She tried to hide her reaction, but Elias noticed. His eyes narrowed slightly. "You running from someone?" he asked quietly. Her pulse quickened. "No," she said quickly, too quickly. "Just bad luck on the trail." Elias didn't press, but his silence said more than words. He'd been around lies before. He could spot one from a mile off. Still, he let it rest. For now. He moved back to the stove, poured another mug of coffee, and set it down for her. "You'll be safe here until you can ride again," he said. "Then you can head wherever you're going." Clara hesitated, wrapping her fingers around the warm mug. "You just let a stranger stay here? A woman you don't know?" Elias looked at her then, and for the first time, she saw something flicker behind those hard, tired eyes. Not suspicion, not pity, but understanding. "You were half dead when I found you," he said. "Don't seem right to send you back into the dust before you can stand." Clara didn't know what to say. She sipped the coffee, its bitterness grounding her. For the first time in days, she felt something close to safety, though she didn't fully trust it yet. Elias returned to his seat, silent as ever, and the cabin filled with the soft hum of the morning wind outside. After a long pause, she spoke again, her tone hesitant but curious. "You live out here alone?" He gave a single nod. "Been that way for a while." Something in the way he said it, quiet, distant but heavy, told her not to ask why. Still, she looked around at the cabin. Everything neat, simple, but touched by memory. A single woman's shawl hung by the door, long faded by time. A child's carved wooden horse sat on the mantel. Elias caught her glance and followed it. His jaw tightened. "Eat, drink, rest," he said, standing. "Don't trouble yourself with ghosts." And with that, he stepped outside into the rising light, leaving Clara staring after him, her heart torn between gratitude and an uneasy curiosity about the man who'd saved her life, yet clearly carried wounds deeper than any snakebite could leave. The days that followed settled into a strange rhythm, quiet, simple, and heavy with unspoken tension. The sun rose early over Cane Ranch, painting the open fields in shades of gold and red. The land stretched far and empty, broken only by windmills, grazing horses, and the distant cry of hawks circling high above. It was a lonely kind of beauty, the kind that hid pain well. Clara Weston was walking again, slowly but surely. The wound on her leg had begun to heal, though it still throbbed when she overdid it. Elias Kane had made her promise not to strain it too soon, but she was too stubborn to sit still for long. Every morning, she'd limp out to the porch with a blanket around her shoulders, watching Elias work, tending to the horses, mending fences, hauling water from the well. He never complained, never seemed to tire. There was a steadiness about him, the quiet kind of strength that came from years of surviving hard seasons. Sometimes she'd catch him glancing her way, not with curiosity or judgment, but as though making sure she was still there, still breathing. "Can't sit all day. You know?" she said one morning, leaning against the porch post as he saddled a horse. He didn't look up. "Ain't asking you to," he replied, adjusting the stirrup. "Well, maybe I want to help." That earned her a brief glance, a flicker of amusement behind his usual calm. "You can start by not falling over," he said dryly, mounting the horse. Clara smiled faintly as he rode off toward the east pasture. It was the first time he'd teased her, the first hint of warmth she'd seen in him since she woke in his cabin. By midday, she'd cleaned the dishes, swept the floors, and found herself standing in front of a small wooden box tucked beneath the window. Inside were faded letters and a lock of hair tied with a blue ribbon. The name on the top letter stopped her breath. Margaret Kane. She didn't mean to pry, but the ache of curiosity got the better of her. She read just a line. "Elias, the doctor says it's not looking good. If I don't make it, promise me you'll keep the ranch." The paper shook in her hand. She put it back carefully, closing the lid. For the first time, she understood why Elias carried that emptiness in his eyes. He wasn't just alone. He was haunted. When he returned later that evening, she tried to act normal, serving him stew over the fire. The air between them was quiet, but not unfriendly. They ate without words for a while, the only sound the soft clink of spoons against tin bowls. Finally, Elias said, "You're healing up good." She looked at him across the firelight. "Thanks to you." He nodded once. "You got someone waiting on you somewhere?" The question hit harder than he knew. Clara lowered her eyes. "Not anymore." He didn't press. He never did, but his gaze lingered a moment longer, searching for truth. Later that night, when Elias had gone out to the barn, Clara sat by the fire, pulling a small pouch from her bag, the one she'd kept hidden since the night he found her. Inside was a folded piece of paper, a wanted poster. Clara Weston, wanted for robbery and murder. $500 reward. Her own face stared back at her from the page, eyes fierce, jaw set. She swallowed hard, running her fingers over the print. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. She had shot a man, but not for money. For survival. The banker had cornered her, tried to force himself on her when she worked as a cleaner in his home. She'd fought back, and one gunshot later, her life had ended in every way that mattered. Now, here she was, hiding under another man's roof. One who had saved her life, trusted her, and didn't yet know the blood that followed her name. The door creaked open behind her. She hastily shoved the poster back into her bag as Elias stepped in, wiping his hands on a rag. His eyes met hers, sharp as ever. "You all right?" "Fine," she said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just tired." He nodded, though something in his stare told her he sensed more than she let on. When he turned away, Clara's gaze lingered on him, on the man who'd saved her, who asked for nothing in return. The guilt gnawed at her chest like a living thing. She knew it couldn't last. Sooner or later, the truth would find her. And when it did, it would destroy the fragile peace she'd found here. But for now, in the quiet warmth of Cane Ranch, surrounded by the whisper of crickets and the glow of the dying fire, Clara let herself believe in something she hadn't felt in a long time. Safety, even, if it was only borrowed. The peace that had settled over Cane Ranch was fragile, like the thin layer of frost that melts at the first touch of morning light. For days, Clara had almost convinced herself that she could stay there forever. The ranch had become a quiet refuge. The walls no longer felt foreign, and Elias's silence no longer felt cold. She'd started tending the garden, brushing the horses, and even helping with small chores when her leg allowed. Elias didn't say much, but his presence carried a kind of comfort. Some nights, they'd sit by the fire, neither speaking, the crackle of wood filling the silence. Once, he'd told her about the storm that took his wife, the flood that rose without warning, the way he'd tried to reach her, and how she'd slipped beneath the water before his eyes. It was the only time Clara had seen him look away when he spoke. That night, she'd almost told him her secret. Almost. But fear kept her tongue tied. She couldn't risk losing the only safe place she'd found. Then came the sound of horses. It was late afternoon, the sun already dipping low behind the ridges. Elias was in the barn when the distant thud of hooves reached his ears. He straightened slowly, his instincts sharpening. Out here, visitors didn't come unannounced, and when they did, it usually meant trouble. Clara was inside, kneading dough at the kitchen table when she heard it too. Her heart stopped. She moved to the window and froze. 3 men rode up the dirt road, dust swirling around them, rifles slung across their saddles. Their coats were long, their eyes hard. She recognized the one in the middle immediately, Tom Varner, the bounty hunter who'd chased her across 3 counties. Her hands went cold. Elias stepped out onto the porch, resting his hand on the rifle by the door. "You boys lost?" Varner grinned, his yellow teeth flashing in the dying light. "Evening, mister. Name's Tom Varner. We're looking for someone. Heard she might have passed this way?" Elias's expression didn't change. "Don't get many visitors out here. That's so?" Varner said, dismounting. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat and held it out. "Maybe you seen her. Name's Clara Weston. Dangerous one. Killed a banker in Red Creek, robbed his safe clean. $500 dead or alive." Inside, Clara's blood turned to ice. She backed away from the window, pressing her hand over her mouth to keep from gasping. Elias didn't reach for the paper. "Don't know her," he said simply. Varner tilted his head, studying him. "You sure about that, mister? We've been following a trail leads mighty close to this ranch. Saw prints heading up this way." Elias shrugged. "Could have been anyone. Land's wide out here." For a moment, no one spoke. The wind picked up, rustling the dry grass. Varner's hand hovered near his gun belt, eyes narrowing. "Mind if we take a look around?" Elias's voice dropped low, calm but firm. "I do mind." Something in his tone made the other two bounty hunters tense. They weren't used to being told no. But Elias Kane wasn't a man who bluffed. He stood tall, his rifle resting easy in his hands, but his eyes were as cold as steel. Varner spat in the dirt. "You hiding her, old man?" "That'd be a mistake. The law don't take kindly to protecting killers." Elias didn't flinch. "Ain't hiding anyone. But you come one step closer to that door, you'll find I don't take kindly to trespassers either." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Then slowly, Varner smiled, the kind of smile that promised this wasn't over. "All right then," he drawled, turning back toward his horse. "We'll be back through in a day or two. If you see her, you let us know." Elias gave no answer. He just watched as they rode off into the dusk, the sound of their horses fading into the distance. When the last echo was gone, he turned toward the house. Clara was standing in the doorway, pale and trembling. Their eyes met, and in that single look, everything was said. He knew. She opened her mouth, but no words came. The secret she'd been burying for weeks lay bare between them now, silent and heavy as a storm waiting to break. Elias finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "You want to tell me why 3 armed men just rode up my land asking for you?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Because they want me dead," she whispered. "And they don't care why it happened." For a long moment, Elias said nothing. Then he set his rifle down, the sound of it echoing softly in the quiet cabin. "Then I reckon," he said at last, "we best be ready when they come back." The next 24 hours passed like the quiet before a storm, still tense and heavy with the weight of what was coming. Elias Kane worked in silence, checking his rifle, mending the old boards along the porch, and stacking wood by the door. Every move was calm, deliberate, but his jaw stayed tight, and his eyes had that faraway look of a man who'd already made peace with what he might have to do. Clara Weston, meanwhile, could barely breathe under the pressure of her guilt. The air in the cabin felt thinner by the hour. She watched him from the window as he moved about the yard, his broad shoulders squared against the wind. He hadn't said much since the bounty hunters left. No anger, no accusation, just that one quiet promise. "We best be ready when they come back." She wanted to tell him to leave her, to save himself before they dragged him into her mess, but the words wouldn't come. Every time she opened her mouth, his calm steadiness silenced her. It wasn't the kind of stubbornness born from pride. It was something else, loyalty, maybe, or something deeper that she didn't have a name for yet. That evening, as the sky turned the color of dying embers, Elias came inside, set his rifle by the door, and poured 2 mugs of coffee. "They'll come at dawn," he said simply. Clara's hands trembled as she took the cup. "Elias, I don't want you hurt because of me. I'll ride out tonight. You can tell them you never saw me." He looked at her then, really looked at her, his gaze steady and unwavering. "You wouldn't make it 2 miles. They'll be watching the trails." Her throat tightened. "Then I'll surrender. I'll tell them the truth, that the banker tried to—" He cut her off gently but firmly. Truth don't matter much to men like that. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the silence thick with unspoken things. The firelight danced between them, casting long shadows on the walls. Finally, Clara's voice cracked. "Why are you doing this?" "You don't even know me." Elias's expression softened, though his tone stayed rough. "I know enough. You're scared. You're running. And maybe you had reason to do what you did." He paused, eyes distant. "I've been judged once or twice myself by men who didn't care much for reason." She blinked back tears, her chest aching. "You could die for me," He shrugged slightly. Maybe, but there's worse things than dying. That night, neither of them slept much. Elias sat by the window, rifle across his lap, eyes fixed on the horizon. Clara lay on the cot, pretending to rest, but every creak of the wind made her heart jump. She wanted to say something, to thank him, to tell him how much this meant. But the words stuck like thorns in her throat. When dawn broke, the sky was pale and quiet. The sound of horses came not long after, slow, deliberate, like the tolling of a bell. Elias rose without a word, stepped outside, and shut the door behind him. 3 riders again. Tom Varner at the lead, his grin meaner than before. "Morning, Kane," he said. "Reckon we'll take a look around now." Elias leveled the rifle in one smooth motion. "You'll do no such thing." Varner chuckled, spitting into the dirt. "That's so. You hiding her in there?" Elias's voice was steady as iron. "She's done nothing to deserve what you bringin'. Turn around and ride off." Varner's grin vanished. His hand went for his gun. "You protecting a murderer makes you one too." The next few seconds unfolded like lightning, quick, deafening, final. Varner drew first. Elias fired before the man's revolver cleared leather. The crack of the rifle split the morning stillness. Varner dropped where he stood. The other 2 bounty hunters fired back, bullets splintering the porch. Elias ducked behind the post, returning fire. Inside, Clara screamed his name and rushed to the window. She saw him, crouched, determined, a storm in human form, and something broke inside her. She grabbed his spare revolver and burst out the door despite his shouted protest. One of the riders aimed at Elias. Clara fired first. The shot caught the man clean, sending him sprawling. The third turned to flee, but Elias's rifle barked once more and silence followed. Smoke hung in the morning air. The only sound left was Clara's ragged breathing and the slow drip of blood into the dirt. Elias lowered his rifle, swaying slightly. Then Clara saw the red spreading across his shirt. She dropped the gun and ran to him, catching him before he fell. "No, no, don't you dare!" she choked, pressing her hands against his wound. He managed a faint smile, his voice barely above a whisper. "Told you. Worse things than dying." Tears streamed down her face. "Why would you do this for me?" He looked at her with the faintest spark of warmth. "Because you deserved a chance to live." As the rising sun spilled over the hills, Clara held him close, her sobs breaking the still morning air. The man who had once saved her from death had now traded his peace for hers. And for the first time since she'd left Red Creek, she understood what true courage looked like. Not in the drawing of a gun, but in the choice to stand beside someone when the whole world said not to. The morning sun climbed slowly over the plains, its golden light stretching across the blood-stained dirt of Cane Ranch. The wind carried the faint smell of gunpowder and dust. The battle was over. The bounty hunters lay silent, their horses long gone, and Elias Kane lay cradled in Clara Weston's trembling arms. His breathing was shallow, each inhale a fight against pain. She pressed her hands against his wound, trying to stop the bleeding, whispering his name again and again like a prayer. "Elias, please stay with me. You can't die, not like this." He blinked weakly, eyes finding hers through the haze of pain. "You gotta go," he rasped. "There'll be more coming. You know that. I'm not leaving you," she cried, her voice breaking. He tried to smile, but it came out as a grimace. "Ain't about me. It's about doing what's right. You ride to Red Creek, tell 'em the truth. Don't let my dying be for nothing." She shook her head furiously, tears spilling down her dirt-streaked cheeks. "They won't believe me." "Then make 'em," he interrupted, his voice hoarse but steady. "You got fire in you, girl. You survived worse. You tell 'em what that banker did. You tell 'em what kind of men they're sending out here to do their dirty work." His hand, rough and calloused, reached up and brushed her cheek, gentle, almost tender. "Don't run no more, Clara. You're better than that." And with that, his strength gave out. His hand slipped away, his eyes closing slowly. The silence that followed was unbearable, vast, heavy, endless. Clara stayed there for what felt like hours, the world around her fading. The wind stirred his hat from the ground, rolling it against her knee. She picked it up, clutching it to her chest, and whispered, "I'll make it right. I promise." By the time the sun was high, she had buried him near the edge of the pasture, beneath an old oak tree overlooking the open range. She marked the spot with a simple wooden cross, carved his name into it with trembling hands. Elias Kane, a good man who did what was right. Then she saddled his horse, the same one that had carried her to safety weeks ago, and rode toward Red Creek. The wind whipped her hair loose, the landscape stretching endlessly before her. Every mile hurt, but she didn't stop. She owed him that much. When she reached town, people stared. Her clothes were torn, her face pale but fierce. The sheriff, a stout man with a trimmed mustache, stepped out of his office, hand resting on his holster. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. "Clara Weston." Clara dismounted slowly, holding her hands up. "I'm not here to fight," she said. "I'm here to tell the truth." Inside the sheriff's office, she told him everything. The banker's attack, the self-defense, the bounty hunters who'd hunted her like prey, and the man who gave his life to protect her. Her voice trembled, but she didn't back down. At first, he didn't believe her. But when she laid Varner's badge on his desk, taken from the dead man's coat, and described the wounds on his men, something in the sheriff's eyes changed. He leaned back, sighed, and rubbed his temples. "Damn fools," he muttered. "They were supposed to bring you in alive. So what happens now?" she asked quietly. He studied her for a long time. "Guess that depends on the jury," he said. "But if what you say's true, maybe it's time this town stopped letting the wrong kind of men call themselves the law." Weeks later, Clara returned to Kane Ranch. The land was quiet again. The fences mended, the horses grazing peacefully. She'd been cleared of her charges. The court had called it self-defense. But she knew it was Elias's sacrifice that had truly set her free. She walked to the oak tree where he rested, a small bouquet of wildflowers in her hand. Kneeling, she placed them by the cross and whispered, "You were right. They believed me." The wind stirred softly, brushing through her hair, carrying the faint scent of rain. She smiled through her tears. "You said not to run anymore, so I won't. I'll keep this place. I'll take care of it, and I'll remember." For a long moment she stood there watching the sun dip behind the horizon. The light caught on the distant hills, painting them gold, the same color as his eyes had been when he looked at her that first morning. Then, with quiet determination, she turned and walked back toward the cabin, toward the life he'd given her the chance to reclaim. And though he was gone, she could still feel him in every breath of wind that swept across the plains. A reminder that even in the harshest corners of the Wild West, goodness could still survive. Elias Kane had saved her life once. But in the end, it was his courage, his sacrifice, that saved her soul.